devoured us all. Look at what he's done.
Yes, he's killed the Empress. What did you do with young Lady Emily, traitor?
Her own bodyguard. Ironic.
I'll see you beheaded for this, Corvo. Peg him.
First-person action-adventure games with heavy-handed steampunk elements have come and gone many times over the years, many of which might seem to blur together at first glance, but upon a more intimate inspection often do show their own shades of the motif, as well as offer wildly different gameplay mechanics and styles. Steampunk itself is widely misunderstood by many and often considered to be a genre of its own, when in reality it's really more of a style, kind of like noir is for movies. While games like Valkyria Chronicles, Siberia, Machinarium could all be considered steampunk, they all still fall into vastly different genres. Those who haven't looked at steampunk in this way might be more at risk of writing games with that style off, but that would be a huge disservice to themselves, as it is a versatile style that can provide a nice variety of excellent games, and likely has at least a couple that will tickle the fancy of many a gamer. One of the many excellent examples of this is Dishonored, and its sequel, the aptly named Dishonored 2. The two games offered a wide variety of abilities, catered to a diverse set of playstyles, and told a story that still sticks in the minds of those who have given them a real chance to do so. Both games satisfied players and reviewers to enough of a degree to make them commercial and critical hits. While of course not without their flaws, they both provide solid experiences from beginning to end, while still maintaining their own identity, and only get better the deeper they go. Neither game cleaned up at the Gaming Awards shows, but they were both nominated in basically every category they were applicable to, and even snagged a few wins here and there. So what happened? Why has Arkane Studios moved on so aggressively to other things like Prey, working on Fallout 76, Wolfenstein expansions, and seemingly left Dishonored in a ditch? What the hell happened to Dishonored? Surely leaving the IP behind in favor of working on Fallout 76 wasn't the initial plan of Arkane Studios, as clearly lots of love and care went into both Dishonored games creating the world and crafting the stories. The first game puts players in the shoes of Corvo, who lives in the fictional, plague-ridden, industrialized, steampunky city of Dunwall that somehow manages to feel bleak and downtrodden while also being infinitely beautiful and intriguing at the same time. Corvo is a loyal bodyguard to the Empress of the Isles, but still is framed for her murder, pursued by the authorities, and ultimately forced into becoming an assassin, in seeking revenge on those who conspired against him. Nothing earth-shattering on paper about the setup, but just like with most aspects of Dishonored, upon actually playing it and giving it a real chance, its many creative intricacies and unique drips of its own flavor start to show up. For instance, the world isn't technically even powered by steam, but whale oil. That doesn't really change things fundamentally, but little touches like that added up very quickly and created a game that stood apart from the rest the more you got to know it. All of this was blanketed by the score of Daniel Licht, which by no means challenged the majesty of James Horner, but it did come surprisingly close for such a relatively unknown composer. His work in Dishonored is arguably some of his best. The gameplay would feature a lot of stealth and action mechanics that were popular at the time, and used in many other games of the era. Although with Dishonored, those mechanics would get a nice twist with some fairly unique powers and enhancements that ranged from extraordinarily fun to downright strange. The many abilities of Dishonored included Dark Vision, that gave the player the ability to see enemies through walls and highlight important items and materials, Blinking, which was essentially a short to medium distance teleporting ability, an ability to temporarily possess other characters, as well as the power to summon a deadly swarm of plagued-out rats that would overwhelm enemies, slowing down time, and the ability to turn enemies into ash, thus preventing anyone from discovering their remains. Most of these abilities were better used to aid in stealth, but could also prove useful in all-out fights and for crowd control. The available weapons were nothing too special, but Dishonored had a way of making swords, grenades, a crossbow, and basic pistols feel like they truly belonged in that world, with the game's sense of style oozing through them. While the story largely revolved around revenge and retribution, there were also some themes of political intrigue sprinkled in. All in all, it was a pretty complete package for the time, and was received well by most reviewers, as it got mostly 9s and strong 8s across the board.
I'm a little disappointed, Corvo. It's like you've gone out of your way to be brutal. It's been interesting traveling with you, but this is the last time you'll see me, sir. Goodbye. My only hope is that Emily comes out of this all right.
As with most games put out by Bethesda at this time, a sequel was immediately planned and put into motion, and would launch just a few short years later on the next generation of consoles and PC. Dishonored 2 would wisely follow in the footsteps of the original in terms of its tone and gameplay, although would introduce new characters and a new city that most of the game would take place in. While the events of the first game were built upon in the second, it did take place many years after those events, so it wasn't so closely tied to the first that somebody who hadn't played it couldn't enjoy this one. As all good sequels do, Dishonored 2 took what worked in the first game, built on it, and smoothed over most of what didn't work. Where the first game's relative linearity seemed to be in conflict with the sense of choice the game wanted to convey, this time around, the world was way more open and made the gameplay choices you made as a player feel much more meaningful. Despite the game bringing many of the original's ideas to a much fuller conclusion and the glorious aesthetic, Dishonored 2 would only see good sales for a short while after launch, especially when compared to the originals. It was handily the 4th best-selling game in its first week of release in North America, but shortly after that, sales took a huge 30% drop compared to the original game's launch numbers. Part of this, perhaps, was the PC version being marred by technical issues, but most largely just chalk it up to so many other excellent games that had either just released or were about to in the same time frame. As great as Dishonored 2 was, it's hard to compete with Overwatch and Dark Souls 3, all games that overshadowed pretty much everything in their paths. While those other games pounding through the competition was surely not Arcane Studios' fault, it's unlikely that the bigwigs at Bethesda saw it as an excuse to get trampled as thoroughly as it did. And on top of that, Arcane's lead designer, Ricardo Baer, has publicly stated that the story of Dishonored was more or less brought to its conclusion with the second game's expansion, Death of the Outsider. Odds are, these factors are why Arcane has moved on to other roles, of finishing up the Prey reboot for the following year, then moving on to do supplemental work for Fallout 76 and Wolfenstein Youngblood. While Arcane is now working on a totally new IP called Deathloop that we know basically nothing about, I wouldn't stick a fork in the Dishonored series just yet. Neither game really did anything horribly wrong, outside of perhaps not making their identity a little clearer on the surface. It is true that you really have to give these games a couple of hours of your time before you really understand what the hell they are exactly, but that doesn't mean the series doesn't still have a place in the future of Bethesda's repertoire of outstanding games. It's a franchise that clearly has its fans, and just as the first game was a great game on its generation, the second was one of its. Perhaps after a few more years of finishing up whatever they're currently doing, Arcane will get the chance to make another Dishonored for the generation of its time as well. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.